got for Christmas, what was under the tree, and was if Santa thought we were on his naughty or his nice list. You know, some people come to mind, definitely on the naughty list. I'm probably, but I shouldn't talk. I may be on there myself. Yeah, well, John, I don't know about you. Anyway, but we are continuing our study of Luke. We are in chapter 9, and we looked at some pretty interesting things last Sunday as the chapter opened. Uh, Jesus sends out the apostles on some missionary training. He says, "Okay, guys, you've spent enough time soaking up everything that's going on. Uh, you've been part of the audience. Now you're going to be part of the lead team on going out and preaching the word." And successful, they come back. Jesus says, "I bet you could use a rest. Why don't we go away to this seaside resort?" And it would have been a nice restful retreat, except that the crowds that are following Jesus see where they're going, and they follow them. They follow Jesus and the disciples along the shore, so that when Jesus and the disciples get out, here's this big crowd waiting for them. And Jesus, being Jesus, doesn't send them away or anything like that. He teaches them, he heals them, casts out demon, and basically this goes on through much of the day and until it's supper time, and it's kind of like, okay, Jesus, what we're going to do here? We got this big crowd. Uh, Jesus says, "Give them something to eat," and the apostles say, "Hey, what are you talking about? We all we got is this little piddly food that this little boy gave us, or we confiscated it from him, whatever." And you're looking, and that's going to feed a crowd of up to 10,000. Jesus says, "Hey, look, everything's under control. Sit everybody down, groups of 50, and when everybody is quieted down, Jesus offers thanks, and then they begins distributing the food, and oh, and suddenly it's no longer 5 loaves and 2 fish. It is lots of bread, lots of fish. As it turns out, plenty for everyone who's hungry, even for those who want seconds, maybe thirds. You know, so much food that there's a surplus, enough to fill 12 baskets. How many apostles were there? 12. Gee, a basket of surplus food for each of the apostles to look at, think about. What happened today? What miracle have we witnessed? What is this supposed to teach us? And we left off there, and Luke goes next verse to another episode, but in between, if you read the Gospels together, if you slip over to John chapter 6, there's some things that are unique to John's account, which is that picking up in verse 14, we're not going to read it verbatim, but we'll summarize what's in John chapter 6. After the crowd has eaten and satisfied, there's this discussion saying, Jesus would make this awfully good Messiah, don't you think? Yeah, yeah. Let's do it. Let's go make him our king. And of course, everybody who signs on to that is thinking of the Jewish belief and the Jewish hope of a reigning Messiah, someone who comes in and overthrows the Romans and any other bad guys by force, reestablishes the kingdom of Israel. Israel is once again this independent country, an independent and powerful country. Um, as we are going to find out, that is not in Jesus's game plan. Anyway, Jesus escapes this drafting movement. Later in the night, Jesus walks on the water, to the amazement, maybe to a little bit of the uh, uh, frightening of the disciples, because Their first thought is they were looking at a ghost. No, it's Jesus on the water. And then morning comes, and the crowds are looking for Jesus. They find him on the other side of of the Sea of Galilee, and there's a discussion ensues where Jesus proclaims himself the bread of life, and he uses he goes so far as to say, you know, my flesh is food, my blood is drink. This is more than some folks, in fact, more than apparently a lot of people in the crowd can put up with. They say this is a man. What's he talking about? I am so out of here, and so they disappear and they desert Jesus. And Jesus asks his inner circle, his apostles, say, "What about you? What are you going to do?" Peter says, "Hey, where can we go, Lord? You have the answer to everything we're seeking." And it's at that point in John's account where Peter confesses uh, Jesus as the Messiah, as the Son of God. And it's also about this point in Luke's narrative where Luke picks up the story in verse 18. Now it happened when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say I am?" Not a bad question given what we've briefly discussed from John's account. Jesus is asking not because he's not sure who he is or he's actually worried about what people think of him or think of who he is. That's not part of Jesus's question here. Jesus is asking this question to direct the discussion and to focus on something very important that's about to happen. Anyway, Jesus says, "Who do the crowds think I am or say that I am?" And the disciples replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." Interestingly enough, this is the impression. This is exactly what folks around King Herod were saying just a few verses earlier in Luke's account. Who is this guy? Well, people think he's John the Baptist. Well, of course, John the Baptist by this time has been beheaded. Elijah, what's the deal about Elijah? Well, Elijah is considered by this time one of the greatest, if not the greatest prophet ever. And so on this very impersonal, quick take poll, opinion poll of who Jesus is, other names come to mind, and of course these are all other prophets that people think have just miraculously come back to life. So they have that discussion, but Jesus continues, presses the question, "What about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" I'm not really impressed. I'm not. I really don't care what the crowds think. Uh, if they like me, fine. If they love me, fine. But the reason I'm asking this question is I want to know where I stand with you. What is your impression to me? And Peter answers, bless his heart, "Well, you're God's Messiah. You are the Christ of God." Great revelation. And Jesus blesses Peter for saying this. In fact, in Matthew's account, Matthew says that Jesus says, you didn't make this discovery on yourself, but God has revealed this to you. So this is finally, it's out in the open. Yes, I am the Son of God. I am the Messiah. But, and here comes the qualifications here, not in terms of Jesus's power, but now that you know who I am and it's been verified, what are you going to do with this information? Verse 21, Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. Really? Gee, Lord, if you are the Messiah, Why hide it? Why put it under a bushel? I mean, you just had this big speech about not, letting your light shine and not hiding it from anyone. Why do you why do you want to keep this a secret? That's probably going through their mind. Hey, s- Lord, why don't you strike while the iron is hot? People are excited about you. You can rush in there and do whatever it is you want to do. Jesus says, no, keep it among yourselves. Don't tell anyone. And not only that, he has this little discussion about what's going to happen to Jesus as the Messiah, as the Son of God. Verse 22, he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the political and religious leaders of the Israelites, the chief priests and the teachers of the law. All those are going to reject me. And not only that, he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Now, this thing about rejection is that probably caught the disciples by surprise. They were thinking about that. Okay, rejection, I can see this, but look at the next thing. Lord, you're going to die? You're going to be murdered? Hey, wait a minute. You lost me here. Doesn't matter that he says at the end, on the third day, I'm going to be raised back to life. It's at this point that we probably have to discuss what the popular opinion is of who the Messiah is and what the Messiah will do. It does have a scriptural basis. Go back, and there are several verses about that discuss God's Messiah, God's appointed one, who will come in and carry out the will of God. Add to that some human interpretations and the things that you really want to uh, think about and how you visualize this Messiah, especially if you are growing up in an environment where you are basically being oppressed. You're, you know, it, Kingdom is Israel at one point in time, independent country, powerful country, but that went away, and now they're under the Israel or whatever passes for Israel these days and times is under the thumb of some oppressive ruler who doesn't recognize or respect who God is. And there's this feeling about, when the Messiah comes, he is going to take care of business. He's going to correct all these all these people and all these situations that's going on and call people to account. This and out of this, and out of several hundreds of years of wishes and wishful thinking and interpretation of the scriptures comes this concept of this super mighty Messiah, this avenger, if you will. You know, Jason has talked about how, you may recall, Jason talked about the origins of the comic strip character we know as Superman, how that basically Superman had his origin and from this Jewish messianic concept of who the Messiah is. It is almost as old as time. It goes back to this all-powerful, avenging. I almost said avenging angel, but basically this super powerful guy who's just going to go in and knock people out. Um, I don't know if they obviously didn't have comic books back in the day. Maybe they had comic scrolls because that's how things were published, but they would have to keep shuffling the paper. But basically their version of comic books would have this Messiah as someone who would just blast through any kind of impediment, any kind of solid wall, any kind of fighting force. You could almost see this scenario where the villain of the day basically said, "You can't touch me, Messiah. I know my rights." And the Messiah says, "Yeah, I'll read you your rights. You have the right to remain dead." And just blast them to annihilation. And of course, the story ends. Each of the story ends with this big celebration. This mighty man who is king once again makes Israel, make Israel great again. That was basically that was the message. That was the hope. That was what everybody expected the Messiah to do. And now Jesus is telling them, no, that's not it at all. Let me tell you what's going to happen. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be rejected by everyone who's important in Israelite society. I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be mocked. I'm going to be ridiculed. And that's going to lead up to my death. I'm going to be murdered in cold blood, basically. But before I am raised back, I am resurrected from the dead, and I am back to life. That is not the popular concept of the Messiah. That is not how people wanted to look at the Messiah. And Peter, this again, we have to go to Matthew for this to fill out this account. Peter realizes, hey, Jesus, you're off script. Hey, man, you're getting everybody scared. And he pushes Jesus aside and says, Lord, hey, no, this is a bad plan. What are you talking about? You gotta come up with something else. And Jesus rebukes him. He says, get behind me, Satan. Something very almost shocking to hear from Jesus just moments after he's told Peter, bless you, Peter, because you are proclaiming something that God himself has revealed to you. And now, moments later, he's telling Peter in a very blunt way, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. So Jesus continues. He says, look, if this is how the Son of Man is going to be, this is how the Messiah is going to be. And you know what? It's not just limited to me, but it's also follows for pretty much anyone else who wants to come after me, who wants to be my disciple. Verse 23, he said to them all, if anyone would come after me, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Jesus, what are you talking about? Crucifixion? Yeah, big time. Remember, what was the what was the form of the extreme punishment? Uh, termination with extreme prejudice. The tool of resort was crucifixion. Basically, flogging a person, hanging him up, nailing him to a cross, and waiting for him, but just basically to die of physical exhaustion. It was something that the Romans did not invent. They just improved on it. But gee, you're talking about, here you are, Jesus, you and your disciples, you're out in a remote area of the country. You're talking about how would people know about crucifixion? Well, pretty much, I would assume that, as horrific as it was, the details got around. Maybe people were not crucified in local towns or anything like that, but there were stories that got out, and especially if anytime the Romans would put down a huge rebellion, what would they do? They would crucify the rebels, and if it meant lining them up, kind of like as you see in the movie Spartacus, you travel along this road, and there's this big line of crucified rebels. That is it Rome is doing that, and it's doing it for a reason. It's sending a message. Mess with us and find out what's going to happen to you. You're going to wind up on one of those crosses just like those rebels. So if you have any ideas about trying to start a rebellion or do anything that would try to overthrow our government here, our rule, think again, because we're going to get you before you can get us. So Jesus takes this concept of crucifixion, as it turns out, the means by which he will be put to death, and he applies it in as an analogy of what's going to happen to me physically, is something that you need to take upon yourselves spiritually. You need to stop thinking about yourself as the center of the universe, where everything revolves around you. I, a lot of us grew up in a time where the people of our age were referred to as the me generation, and that was because there was so much stuff that was paid attention to: self-care, self-interest, self-preservation. Not only how do I keep myself healthy, wealthy, and wise, but where can I go to get that perfect meal? What's the latest restaurant to opening that offers that wonderful, the ultimate dining experience? What is this must-see movie that's in the theater or the show on TV? It all boils down to what's in it for me, me. You know, it, uh, when you look at some of the commentaries of the day, it sounds like it started with our generation. But hey, nothing really new under the sun. People have always been kind of self-centered. What's in it for me? What can I do to take care of myself and make myself flat-footed and fat and happy? Uh, that's been the expectation for as long as people have been around. And Jesus says, that's not what following me is about. You need when every day that when you wake up, get out of bed, first thing you need to do is to deny yourself and focus on what is it that I want you to do? What is it that God has set on your table to take care of? So you've got to deny yourself. You've got to take up that cross spiritually, and die daily to yourself, but be alive for me. Follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Anyone who just goes whole hog in terms of being part of the me generation, and an effort to and saving their life, basically taking care of themselves, uh, focused on themselves 100%, they're ultimately going to be disappointed because nothing lasts forever. Whoever wants to save his life, live selfishly, that is, will lose it, will lose his life. But whoever loses his life for me will save it. Whoever lives for me, makes me his Lord, his or her Lord, the Lord of their life, will ultimately inherit eternal life. Jesus continues, verse 25. What what profit is it for someone or for a man to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit his very self? That's the price that self-centered individuals ultimately pay, but they never think about that. That's the ultimate outcome for someone who lives selfishly. You think you're gaining everything, but ultimately you lose everything. You find yourself in a very bad place. And then not just for anyone who's deciding whether or not to follow Jesus, but what about those who follow Jesus but are in a very timid way? Oh yeah, Lord, I'll follow you, but hey, it'll be our little secret. I think there were a lot of it, when we were in middle school, junior high school. There were folks who were kind of like, "Well, I'm your secret friend. Yeah, let's be friends, but don't tell anyone, because I don't want the cool kids over in this group to realize that, hey, I'm hanging out with the likes of you." Jesus says, "Hey, look. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man, will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. So if you're going to follow, do it wholeheartedly. Jump in with both feet, because there's a difference between following me and being a true follower, true disciple, and someone who does it timidly, half-heartedly, kind of like, okay, well, I can't. There's nothing left for me to do but follow Jesus, but don't tell anyone. I'm a secret Christian. In Jesus' point of view, there is no such thing as a secret Christian. You're a member of the club or you're not. And then he makes this statement, verse 27. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death, physical death, before they see the kingdom of God. Gee, Jesus, what are you talking about? And you can read a variety of commentaries that try to flesh out the impact or what Jesus was referring to. Perhaps what Jesus is referring to, Luke reveals in the very next few verses, verse 28. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him, the inner circle, and they went up onto a mountain to pray. Scripture doesn't say which mountain, but there are several you can choose from. Folks are thinking maybe this was what is known today as Mount Hermon. Anyway, as Jesus was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Forget about bleach. It is, whiter than white, brighter than bright, almost blindingly bright. Something really unique is going on here. Not only does Jesus' appearance change, verse 32, men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor talking with Jesus. How do we know? Or how does Luke know? How do the disciples know that these two men were Moses and Elijah? There was someone who said, well, it's easy. They were wearing name tags that said, hello, my name is. No. I, that's kind of a joke, but I think, the disciples just knew. And this may be kind of a representation, a little bit of a taste of how life will be in heaven, where we will have that level of knowledge, that level of perception. We won't need to be introduced to certain people. We will just know who they are. That because thanks to the perception and the knowledge and the intelligence that God has placed in each of us. But two men, Moses and Elijah. Why Moses and Elijah? Well, think about and what they represent. Moses, the lawgiver, the one who delivered the law that basically ruled Jewish society. And it's referred to sometimes erroneously as the law of Moses, because it didn't come from, Moses was the channel. It came through Moses. It was delivered by God. Elijah, as we mentioned before, considered to be the chief of prophets. So much so that if you remember, Elijah did not die a physical death. He was called into heaven without physically dying. You have the lawgiver and you have the prophet. They represent the law and the prophets. The law and the prophets. Does that sound familiar? The law and the prophets are what the Jewish culture, Jewish followers referred to as the totality of God's scriptures, what we know today as the Old Testament. And what was the chief thing about the Old Testament scriptures? They pointed to the coming of the Messiah and the revelation, the eventual unfolding of the ultimate unfolding of God's plan for mankind. Here we have Moses and Elijah, also in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about Jesus' departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem, which is kind of a nice reminder for those of us who tend to think, gee, wasn't it, you know, uh, Jesus winding up being put to death, being murdered, being crucified. Gee, that was kind of an accident, wasn't it? No, that was God's plan from the beginning, and the plan was being carried out as without any kind of hitch. So they're having this discussion, and initially, verse 32, Peter and his companions were very sleepy. They had just kind of dozed off while Jesus was praying, but suddenly you get this flash of lights. You hear these voices, and you see these two guys that obviously Moses and Elijah. They're talking with Jesus. Three very big people, three very uh, important folks. And Peter is smart enough to realize, hey, this is something significant here. The disciples became fully awake. They saw Jesus' glory and the two men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, Master, it's good for us to be here. Let's put up 3 tents, 3 shelters, 3 tabernacles. Hey guys, don't go away. Come on back. We can accommodate you here. In fact, we can put you up for the night. We'll put up these 3 tabernacles. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Peter's kind of thinking, he's still probably half asleep, but good old Peter, good old impetuous Peter, trying to think of something appropriate to say or do, and that this sounds like a good idea. Hey, yeah, uh, hey Lord, just this is even better. Not not just you, but have these 2 other really important guys along with you. It'll confirm who you are, what a big deal you are. Well, even as Peter was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered over them. They were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, This is my son whom I have chosen. Your translation may say, This is my beloved son. Listen to him. God is making a point here because when the voice had spoken, the disciples found that Jesus was alone. The glory of Jesus dims down so you can look at him. You know? The 2 guys, Moses and Elijah, have disappeared. The only one standing is Jesus. And yes, Moses and Elijah were there for a purpose. They represented the Old Testament, all the scriptures, and especially those scriptures that pointed to the coming of Jesus. But now it's only Jesus, which is God's way of saying, look, Jesus is not just another in a long line of prophets and men of God. Jesus is the one. He is the fulfillment of God's word. He is the final word. He's the declaration. He's the revelation. No one else is comparable to him. Listen only to him. Follow only him. Luke says the disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen. Well, for good reason, because Matthew tells us, chapter 16, verse 9, that Jesus tells them, don't tell anyone what has happened until I'm raised from the dead. So uh, Jesus now, if they have whatever regard, whatever allegiance, whatever level of worship they have for Jesus has just been magnified manyfold by this experience. They know for a fact, they know beyond a shadow of a doubt who Jesus is, that he is the Son of God, that he is God's Messiah, that he is the one that the Jews have been looking for, waiting for, and expecting. And to that point, the expectations, that's as far as the expectations are correct. Everything else has been built up over decades, over hundreds of years of wishing and hoping about what the Messiah, who he was and what he will do. That will ultimately happen because the scriptures do foretell a time when Jesus will return as all powerful and almighty. But before that happens, there are other things that need to be done that are essential to God's plan. So, Peter, James, and John have what we like to call as a mountaintop experience. And from time to time, we do have similar experiences, perhaps nothing as dramatic as what we've just seen and read about. But we have those moments where we realize, hey, this is something very special. God is speaking to me. God is revealing something to me. Oh man, this is great. I could stay here forever. I'm sure we would. I'm sure if God let us do whatever he wanted to do, yeah, we would stay on that mountaintop for the rest of our lives. But when we have those mountaintop experiences, it's more than just for our entertainment, for our enjoyment, for our to help it to confirm and strengthen our belief. It's there for a purpose to prepare us for the work that God has created us and set in place for us to do. And as the disciples, as Peter and James and John are about to find out, at some point you got to come down from that mountain. You got to come down and you got to get get dirty. You got to mess around with all the people around you, with all the people that God has placed in your life. And he has put you there and he has put them there for a particular reason to help carry out his will. So we're going to see what happens after as they come down the mountain, and that'll be a continuation of chapter 9. If you will, read the rest of that chapter, and that'll be, Lord willing, our lesson next Sunday. Hope you enjoyed the lesson. Hope you got something out of it. Hope you have a great week and a Merry Christmas. Um, Thanksgiving is always the big eating day, but Christmas is kind of like the close second. So I hope you get what you were hoping Santa would bring. I hope you have a really, really wonderful meal and a time to visit with family. And have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday.